for evolution, we've said, so there are three big parts, and number one we said was fossil evidence. Number two was structural evidence, and the structural has two big parts. The homologous structures, and now we're going to talk about vestigial structures. So let's get going with the vestigial structures. Okay. So vestigial structures are structures that are present on modern organisms that don't have a purpose. There's no function to them. And we said they're remnants, they're leftovers. So if you walk into this room and there are deflated balloons hanging from the ceiling and there's confetti on the floor, you missed a great party. Those are vestiges of the party that happened here. That's what vestigial structures are. Very often they're reduced in size. So your little tiny tailbone, your tailbone's this long. Look at a monkey tail. Monkeys have these beautiful long tails. They function for balance. If you're living in a tree, balance is pretty important. It's like a tightrope walker carrying a pole. That's how the monkey uses their tail to hang on, to balance themselves. If you're not living in a tree, it just uses more calories to feed your tail, and you don't need it anymore. So it gets smaller and smaller because you have an advantage without it. It's something that a predator can grab onto. If you're not in a tree, there's a real disadvantage. So eventually a species can lose a tail. Snake legs. Anybody here have snakes at home? Anybody raise boas or anything? Some years I get people who have boas and other big snakes at home. Okay. Have you ever seen a snake with legs? Did you know that snakes could have legs? So snakes have a common, and snakes are a reptile. Name me another reptile. Lizards, alligators, crocodiles, turtles, those are all reptiles. Snakes and lizards share a common ancestor, and if you really think about it, lizards look a lot like a snake with legs. So and whale legs. We looked at the little useless sort of legs in Basilosaurus, and in modern whales, there are actually leg bones under the blubber. They just don't really connect to anything. There's no muscular attachment, but the bones are still there. In boa constrictors, there are actually, on the outside, there are little tiny legs. So these things on the underside of a boa constrictor are these little tiny nubs. But if you look inside the body of a boa constrictor, there are actually bones in there that are very much like the rear legs of a lizard. So these are a vestigial structure. Why would something become vestigial? It's being selected against. So when we say selected against, it means there's an advantage to not having it. So if something is selected against, there is an advantage to not having it. Okay. So in the case of snake legs, a lot of snakes spend a lot of time, they move very quickly over the ground. If you've got legs, the kind of motion that they do, those could actually hang up on stuff. So maybe a snake that has legs is slower. There is an advantage to not having legs. Interestingly enough, boas, I believe it's boas that actually use these little legs in reproduction. The male holds the female with those little vestigial legs. So they're no good for locomotion anymore. But they have this sort of like secondary use. So sometimes a vestigial structure, something that's already there, once it gets down to a point where it's really reduced, there is some advantage. And very often, you know, that vestigial structure then gets used for something else. So that's what a vestigial structure is. Let's talk about the human appendix. So that's the human appendix. Here's your basic guts. That is the appendix. So, here are your, you've got your liver, your stomach leading into your intestines, and your large intestine leading down to the rectum and out, the escape hatch for what's left. On the end of this large intestine, where the stuff from the small intestine comes in, is this little pouch, this little tail. And it's a hollow pouch. It's like a little bag attached to the intestine. It is thought that that is from when we had a much longer intestine, and we don't need a longer intestine now. So, what are the risks and benefits of having this appendix?
Didn't say the appendix like flushed out?
No, doesn't flush out anything.
Stored.
It does store something. So remember we said sometimes vestigial structures can end up having a function that's totally unrelated to what they used to do. Who here has ever been on an antibiotic? Okay. Sometimes you take an antibiotic and you get diarrhea. Why? It's a side effect. Why is it a side effect? It's not your body. It is the bodies of all the little bacteria in your gut that keep you healthy. So you know that your gut and your butt, are full of bacteria, right? There are more bacterial cells in and on you than there are your own cells. If you kill all the bacteria in your gut, you die. Literally, without bacteria in your gut, you're dead.
Is it like the stomach acid or like green stuff that comes out?
That's bile. That's bile. That's a different thing.
Because like in last wrestling season, like I cut down I was going up.
That's bile. That's not a good thing. Not a good thing. No, but the bacteria, I mean, you can't see them. There are bacteria on your desk surface. Look at it. There are bacteria on your hands and arms, bacteria on your face, bacteria on your clothes, bacteria in the air you're breathing. You can't see them. But your guts are full of bacteria, and if you don't have those bacteria, you can't digest your food. If you take an antibiotic, antibiotics kill all bacteria. Broad spectrum antibiotics kill everything. So they kill the bugs that are making you sick, but very often they also kill your gut bacteria, and that's when you get diarrhea. So eating yogurt helps because you're repopulating your gut bacteria. There's living bacteria in yogurt. You didn't know that? We're going to make yogurt later this year. We'll grow our own bacteria. It'll be fun. So what's interesting is that when you take a round of antibiotics, they go through the intestines, but they don't usually hit the appendix. So the appendix has bacteria living in it too. The same bacteria that are in your guts. And very often this now functions as a reservoir for bacteria, so that when you take an antibiotic, the bacteria from here end up repopulating your gut. They're finding more and more how much your gut bacteria affects your mental health. It affects your physical health. They're finding that cancers may be linked, like my best friend died of colorectal cancer, and they're finding that that is very strongly linked to your gut bacteria, that having healthy gut bacteria can protect you from disease. Like, your bacteria are critical. Question?
Well, I was just want to tell you, like, my dad had like lung cancer, so when he's getting radiation and stuff, they made him like eat like yogurt and stuff.
Yeah, my dad went through chemo, same thing. Okay, hey, summarize your notes for yourself. I want to see it tomorrow. You do a dossier summary. Keep doing your summaries.